Hello and welcome to your online GDM education session. My name's Anuradha and I'm one of the diabetes specialist dietitians here at King's College Hospital. The purpose of today's session is to talk you through all different aspects around what gestational diabetes is and how we as your diabetes team will be supporting you through the course of your pregnancy journey. Hopefully after today's session, all your queries and questions that you may have had at this stage will be answered. But if you do need any further support after the session, we do advise you to get in contact with our team. So in today's session, I'm going to be discussing what gestational diabetes is and why it might come about in your pregnancy. We'll go through the different dietary recommendations and exercise advice to help you in supporting your management of this. We'll talk you through the different medications which we might use to support your diabetes management through the pregnancy. And we'll talk through the finger prick testing, the GDM Health app to help you get set up. I'll also be discussing a few aspects for post-delivery care and type 2 diabetes prevention, which will be important for you to note. And at the end, there'll be a list of email addresses, contact numbers, and contact points for you to take note of, which you might find helpful through the course of your pregnancy. So let's start with what this type of diabetes is. This is a form of diabetes that is just linked to your pregnancy. It comes about because of the different hormone changes that are released in your pregnancy, interfering with how your body is able to process glucose. And they affect the functioning of one of the hormones called insulin, which helps us to do this. Gestational diabetes typically presents in the second and third trimesters of pregnancy. So if you are someone who has been diagnosed at a fairly later stage in your pregnancy, please do not worry. The reasons why you might have developed this in the pregnancy could be varied. But if you are someone who presents with any of these risk factors listed on the slide, that could potentially have been why. So for example, if you have had a previous pregnancy where you had gestational diabetes before, or perhaps you had a previous birth where your baby was born with a slightly higher weight, so above 4.5 kilos, that could be a risk factor. If your body weight prior to pregnancy was in a slightly higher weight category, so your body mass index was above 30, that could also be another risk factor. Genetics plays a role. So if you're from a South Asian, Middle Eastern, or African Caribbean ethnic group, your chances of developing this diabetes would have been slightly more than another individual of a different ethnic group. And family history plays a role too. So if you've got any direct family members, any parents or any siblings who are living with type 2 diabetes, that could also have potentially been a reason why you've developed this diabetes in your pregnancy. So to understand why gestational diabetes comes about, it's important to first understand how our body processes work usually and how our digestive processes work. So normally when we take in carbohydrate-based foods, these are digested down in our body and broken down into glucose. That glucose will circulate around your bloodstream, and this will trigger your pancreas, which is one of your body organs, to release a hormone called insulin. This insulin helps us to be able to utilize that glucose by transporting it from your blood into your body tissues and helps us to utilize the glucose as our main energy source. Now, in the pregnancy, you have different pregnancy hormones that are released from your uterus, and they interfere with how insulin is normally able to function, which is why you get those high blood glucose levels, which are characteristic of this type of diabetes. Now, it's important to note that if the diabetes is really well controlled through your pregnancy, there's no reason why you can't have a healthy, normal pregnancy and healthy, happy baby at the end of this journey. But the complications which I'm going to discuss with you now might arise if the diabetes is not appropriately managed. So by that I mean, if you are in a situation where you are consistently having high blood glucose levels, or you're not working with the diabetes team to appropriately manage the diabetes, then that is where these complications might arise. So for yourselves as the mother, one of the knock-on side effects of having high blood glucose levels could be that you start to develop high blood pressure in the pregnancy. High blood pressure, if that's not accordingly managed, can affect how your placenta develops. Now, your placenta is one of the organs that supplies your baby with its oxygen needs and its nutrient needs. So in turn, this might have an effect on how the baby grows and develops as the pregnancy progresses. And this is a condition called preeclampsia. For the baby, there are several different aspects that can affect the baby's health if the diabetes is not under control. So if you are having high blood glucose levels circulating around your body, that means your baby is also receiving that high level of glucose. This may cause the baby to grow slightly larger in size, or the baby might develop extra volume of amniotic fluid around it. Now, these features would be picked up upon when you come in for your growth scans in the hospital, and the team indicate how the baby is doing against the different parameters. At your 36-week point in the pregnancy, you will meet with the obstetrician to discuss your birthing plan and your birthing options. Now, if your baby presents with any complications, such as the extra weight, the extra amniotic fluid known as polyhydramnios, or if there are any other complications linked to the diabetes, then you might be recommended to adapt your birthing plans accordingly, purely thinking about the safety of you progressing with the pregnancy as well as delivering the baby. So for example, you might be recommended to deliver the baby slightly sooner in the pregnancy, so anywhere from the 37th week onwards. You may also be recommended to consider having a cesarean section or an induced labor. So the induced labor is where the medical team will artificially stimulate the labor process, and they do this by inserting a pessary or a gel into your vagina or through an IV format or both. You might also not need to have any of these options, and you may be able to progress to full term and deliver your baby naturally. But this is all really dependent upon your overall health in the pregnancy and also how the diabetes is being managed. Now, after the birth, if the baby is moving from a high glucose environment in your womb to a lower glucose environment after the birth, the baby might experience something called hypoglycemia. So this is where the baby's glucose levels take a slight dip. And for this, a bit of medical attention might be needed just to stabilize the baby's glucose levels. Jaundice is another health condition that may affect the baby after the birth. And this is where the baby gets a yellowing discoloration of its skin and eyes. And again, might just need a bit of medical attention on the ward to stabilize this. Now, in the most extreme, worst case scenario, really poorly managed diabetes can also lead to you having a stillbirth, so where your baby is not born alive, which is why it's really important that we get the diabetes under control and keep you and your baby healthy through the pregnancy. And that's why we, as your diabetes team, will be very intensely involved in your pregnancy care throughout, and you will have a lot of support from our team going forward. So as part of your diabetes care, you will have a combination of face-to-face appointments with different members of our multidisciplinary team. So that will include the diabetes dietitians, the diabetes specialist nurses, the diabetes consultants, the midwife team, as well as the obstetrician. Now, these can be very long appointments lasting a few hours, and they are based at the Venetian building on the Denmark Hill site of King's College Hospital. So when you come in for these appointments, please do factor in some time to attend these appointments. Any appointments which you have scheduled with the diabetes team will appear on your Badgernet app. So please do keep a lookout on the app for any upcoming appointments that you might have. In addition to these face-to-face appointments, you will also receive telephone appointments and face-to-face appointments specifically with our midwife team. Now, your midwifery care in terms of your diabetes management will be transferred across to the Ruskin midwife team. Unless for any reason you've specifically chosen to stay with your current midwife team. So hopefully the Ruskin team has already been in contact with you since your diagnosis, but if you haven't heard from them yet, please do give it a few days and they will be in contact. Now, you will also, in addition to these appointments, have one member of our team. So that might be the dietitians, it may be the diabetes specialist nurse, or one of the midwife team who will be looking into your GDM health app data and your finger prick test results and seeing how you're doing on a weekly basis, which is why it's really important that we do encourage you to download the GDM health app as well as starting to do those finger prick tests, because those finger prick tests will be really useful for us to guide any clinical decisions we need to make. So in terms of finger prick testing, hopefully you've been able to start doing these and are getting into a routine of completing these each day. We ask you to complete 4 finger prick tests each day. So that will be once before breakfast on an empty stomach. And those readings should be between 3.5 and 5.2. There are several different aspects that can affect that first reading in the day. So for example, if you have been snacking on any high sugar food or fluid overnight, if you are particularly stressed, you're unwell with, say, a cough, cold, or COVID, or perhaps you've had a long gap between dinner the previous night and breakfast the next morning, that's known as a prolonged fasting period, all these factors can affect your fasting levels in the morning, causing them to go high or above target. The other points of testing through the day will be 1 hour after you've finished eating each of your main meals, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We ask you to complete the test at the 1 hour point because that gives us the most accurate reading as to what's going on with your glucose levels internally. And those readings, we're aiming for those to be between 4 and 7. Again, there could be several different reasons why you might be having high readings after your meals. So the first things we'd look into are what have you had to eat or drink with that particular meal? And if there's any advice we can give from a dietary perspective. Sometimes your high readings are nothing to do with your diet or your exercise levels, and they may just be caused by the pregnancy hormone changes themselves and the stage you're at within your pregnancy. So your insulin needs would naturally be higher in your second and third trimesters of pregnancy. So sometimes those high readings might just be linked to the pregnancy hormone changes and the insulin needs themselves, and we may need to adapt your management plan accordingly if this is the case. Now, hopefully you've been able to get on really well with doing those finger prick tests, but we just have some useful advice that you might find helps to make things a little bit easier. So before taking each test, where possible, we do advise you to wash your hands with purely soap and water. So please do not use any hand sanitizers, hand gels, or hand creams, as these solutions can interfere with the test result. When you're doing your finger prick test, please make sure that you're rotating the fingers accordingly with each test, and also that you're doing the finger prick on the side of your finger, so not on any other points, as you may get very sore fingers quite quickly. And then the test result you're looking for is the number that appears on the meter itself. So if your meter has a Bluetooth function, you should be able to synchronize the reading you've just taken with the app, and that should then appear on your GDM Health app record for us to be able to view. If your meter does not have a Bluetooth function, you will need to manually enter that reading, and there is an option on the app to be able to do that. So the next things we're going to be talking you through are the dietary aspects of your care. So in terms of dietary recommendations, really, first and foremost, what we always encourage is that you follow healthy eating principles and maintain a balanced diet throughout your pregnancy. So by that, I mean it's really important that with each main meal, you're having a regular meal pattern, first and foremost. So a consistent breakfast, lunch, and dinner each day is recommended. And within each meal, it's important you're having the right combination of macronutrients. So carbohydrates are a really important food group that you should be incorporating with each main meal. Carbohydrates, as we mentioned earlier, provide us with a good source of energy. They give us a lot of B vitamins. They also give us a good source of fiber too. So fiber can help to regulate your bowel motions. And also, if you are someone who is experiencing any constipation through your pregnancy, adding in the extra fiber through your diet can help with that. Carbohydrates also provide a great source of calcium too. So calcium is important for your bone health. It's important for the developing limbs of your baby as well. It can also be really important to build up your calcium reserves through the pregnancy, particularly if you're planning on breastfeeding your baby after birth. And studies have shown that having adequate calcium through your pregnancy can also reduce your risk of developing preeclampsia. So it has multiple benefits. For the diabetes side of things specifically, it is important that you are incorporating a small portion of carbohydrates with each main meal, and that you're not over-restricting the carbohydrates, which can be something quite commonly occurring, particularly when you're first diagnosed. Now, if you're not producing or providing your body with enough carbohydrate each day, this can cause your body to break down its fat stores to artificially make glucose. And that process generates something called ketones. Now, ketones are not good for you. They're not good for the baby. They can make your body very acidic in environment too, and can, in extreme cases, lead to a hospital admission where you might need treatment of ketones. So it is really important that you're making sure with each main meal you are including sufficient carbohydrate, but that you're working with portion sizes that are in line with our recommendations, which we'll go on to discuss in just a moment. Now, because your carbohydrate portions will be quite small, we do encourage you to, alongside this, have bigger portions of your vegetables, your proteins, and your healthy fats. Just be aware that some vegetables are known as starchy vegetables, which are carbohydrate-containing vegetables. So they will also affect your blood glucose levels. So the more common ones you might include could be potatoes, sweet corn, carrots, or aubergines, for example. You've got your healthy fats as part of a balanced diet too. So your healthy fats would be your omega-3 fats or your unsaturated fats. And these can be found in, for example, your cooking oils, such as olive oils, vegetable oils, rapeseed oils, any spreads made from these oils too. Avocados are a great source, nuts and seeds, as long as you're not allergic, as well as oily fish. So salmon, trout, mackerel might be something you want to incorporate as well. And your healthy fats can help with the absorption of some of your fat-soluble vitamins. And then lastly, you've got your protein-based foods. So these are your muscle building blocks and can help with the growth and development of your baby as well. So these would be found in animal-based products, for example, meat, fish, eggs, anything like plant-based sources, soya, beans, lentils, pulses, legumes, they're all great sources of protein too. So it's this combination of nutrients that you're looking to incorporate within each main meal to ensure you're getting the right balance of nutrients to support you and your baby through the pregnancy, but also to keep the diabetes under control too. Now, we focus specifically around the type of carbohydrate foods that you have, as well as the portion sizes of these when we go on to discuss specifics to do with the dietary recommendations. So what we always encourage is that predominantly within your diet, you do have carbohydrates which are falling under the low glycemic index category, also known as the slow release or high fiber carbohydrate options. So these could be foods like your wholemeal, whole grain, seeded varieties of products, for example. And the reason being is because once these foods are digested in your body, they just give you a very gradual rise and fall to your blood glucose levels, and therefore have a stabilizing effect for you and your baby. The carbohydrates which we would advise you to avoid where possible would be those known as quick release sugars, because these will cause spikes to your blood glucose levels, which is not going to be good for you or the baby. So these would typically be foods such as sugar itself, any honey, syrups, cakes, molasses, chocolates, biscuits, pastries, all your fun foods, essentially. We do advise where possible to avoid those for the duration of the pregnancy. So what I'd like to encourage you to do now is to just take a minute or two to have a think about the common meals and fluid choices that you currently take in, and see, based on what we've discussed so far, are there any areas where perhaps you could make any changes to your diet? So whether that be your dietary routine through the day, whether that be changes in portions that you're having, or perhaps even the types of carbohydrate foods that you might be including. And just take a note down for yourself as potential areas which you can look into to try and make some swaps. So we'll now move on to the specifics around the recommendations. So as I said earlier, it's the carbohydrate foods that we really focus in on. So our recommendations are to include a total carbohydrate content of between 30 to 50 grams per meal. So this is not referring to the weight of the carbohydrate food, but the carbohydrate content, which can be a little confusing. So what I've tried to do over the next few slides is to demonstrate some of the more common carbohydrate foods you might be including as part of your staple diet, and to give you the appropriate portion sizes of these per meal. So for example, if you're someone who enjoys perhaps toast in the morning for your breakfast, or maybe a sandwich at lunch, you can make this up with 1 or 2 slices of a wholemeal, whole grain, or seeded toast. If you enjoy a bagel with one of your meals, 1 medium-sized bagel could be the right portion. Perhaps you enjoy something like a wrap for lunch or dinner. So you could make this up with 1 medium-sized wholemeal or seeded wrap. If you are following a South Asian diet and you typically have rotis with your meals, then 1 medium-sized whole wheat roti would be the right amount of carbohydrate for the meal. If you enjoy cereals in the morning, cereals with milk or yogurt will count as your carbohydrate food portion for that meal. And that's because any milk or any yogurts will also contain natural milk sugars within them in the form of lactose. So for example, suitable cereal options could be your high fiber cereals like a plain bran flakes or bran, or maybe a Weetabix. And you could do a small bowl of a cereal with your milk or yogurt, and that could be a suitable portion for you. If you're someone who enjoys mueslis or granolas, they are great options too, but just remember they might contain dried fruit in them. Dried fruit is very concentrated in sugar, so where possible with these particular products, we always advise you to go for the no added sugar versions, or the ones which are packed full of protein foods, so the ones with extra seeds or extra nuts, which you could also do yourself. If you're someone who enjoys oats in the morning or porridge in the morning, that's great too. So something like a cornmeal porridge, you can make up with milk, 1.5 cups, that would be the right amount. Or with your porridge oats, go for the jumbo rolled oats. And again, it's a small bowl portion size would be suitable. If you're enjoying a South Asian diet and perhaps you're having something like dosas or idlis or varas with your main meal, then just be advised these are your carbohydrate foods. So 2 small idlis or 2 small varas would be the right portion of carbohydrate for a meal. If you're having a dosa, try and go for 1 medium-sized whole wheat dosa and go for a plain dosa where possible. And if you're having something like a thepla for your breakfast meal or perhaps for any of your other meals, 1 medium-sized plain thepla, again, would be the right portion. And then we go on to discuss your grains. So if you're having any grains like bulgur wheat, couscous, or something like quinoa, for example, they're great to incorporate. So you're looking at a cup portion of cooked versions of these would be the suitable amount of carbohydrate for the meal. If you enjoy rice with your meals, so rice is absolutely fine to have. Something like a basmati white rice, if you prefer white rice, could be a good option because it's naturally slow release. If you enjoy brown rice for the extra fiber, that could also be a good choice. Or perhaps you have jollof rice as part of your staple diet. That's also fine to have. The main thing with your rice is probably the portion sizes you need to be careful of. So for rice, we suggest having 5 tablespoons of cooked rice as a suitable portion. If you're enjoying any noodles with meals, that again would be your carbohydrate portion of the meal. So with noodles, you're looking for a cooked weight of between 100 to 115 grams roughly as a suitable portion. And if you enjoy pastas, so that could be any version of pastas, whether it's lentil pastas, the normal white-based pastas, or whole wheat pastas, you're looking at a cup portion of cooked versions of these would be sufficient. And then as I was mentioning earlier, there are some vegetables in our diets which will contain carbohydrates. And therefore, once they're digested down in the body, they will also contribute to your glucose levels. So for example, if you're having potatoes with a main meal as your carbohydrate food source, you can make this up with 1 medium-sized potato or 5 baby potatoes. You might enjoy having something like carrots or sweet corn. So 4 tablespoons of each of these out of a tin could be an option for you, or medium-sized corn on the cob. If you enjoy a plantain with your meal or perhaps yams, they're great to incorporate, but they are very rich in carbohydrate. So a small plantain or a cup portion of boiled cubed yam could be an option for you. If you include foods like iba, gari, fufu, amala, banku within your staple diet, then again, individually, you're looking at a fistful portion would be the right amount of carbohydrate for your meal. And also, if you're incorporating any legumes in your diet, so any beans, chickpeas, lentils, dals, something like hummus or falafels will also be included in this because they're chickpea based, then they are great sources of protein and have a lot of different vitamins and minerals, so are good foods to incorporate within your meals. But they do contain a small amount of carbohydrate and therefore will have an impact on your blood glucose levels. So you might find if you're having a meal where you're serving up more than 1 carbohydrate food on the plate, you might wish to try having smaller portions of each of those foods as a better balance to your meal. And then you can always add in more of your non-starchy vegetables, like any green leafy vegetables, for example. So cabbage, spinach, kale, broccoli, green beans are a great addition. You might find an extra helping of a protein-based food or your healthy fats into the meal might just help to better balance the meal nutritionally, as well as keep your glucose levels within target range. And please do have a look at the dietary leaflets that we've provided you in your GTT packs for further recipe inspiration or meal ideas. Now, this next slide is really to highlight the importance of being aware that any dairy or non-dairy alternate options you might be consuming, particularly in regards to milks and yogurts, they will have natural milk sugars within them. So do be aware that particularly if you're having these products with your main meals, they will also contribute to the carbohydrate content of the meals. So for example, something like a regular cow's milk is great to incorporate. It's of course a good source of protein, but has a good amount of iodine in it as well. And iodine is a really important nutrient that helps with the cognitive or brain development of your child, as well as the immune system development. If you're someone who is not keen on cow's milk, or perhaps for any intolerance or allergy reasons, you opt to have dairy alternate options, that's absolutely fine to do so. But we would always advise you to go for something like a soy milk or an almond milk, which nutritionally has a better profile and a lower carbohydrate content, compared to something like an oat milk or rice milk or coconut milk. And the oat milks and the rice milks, we do advise for you to stay away from because they are very, very rich in carbohydrates. Okay, so that's the main meals which we've just discussed. So we advise a carbohydrate content of between 30 to 50 grams for those. If you are someone who is snacking, say mid-morning, mid-afternoon, or even overnight, that's not a problem. It's just about making sure anything you're snacking on is serving you from a nourishment point of view. And also it's about smart snacking when it comes to your diabetes as well. So with snacks, you can either choose to opt for just a purely protein-based food, which won't have too much of an effect on your blood glucose levels, or you might find that you need that energy boost with the snack, and you may wish to incorporate carbohydrates within your snack. If you are incorporating a carbohydrate-containing food in the snack, we do advise not to exceed more than 15 grams of carbohydrate content. So that could be the equivalent of a slice of bread, 2 to 3 rye beaters, oat cakes, rice cakes, for example, of course, the whole grain versions or seeded versions where possible. It could include a small glass of milk just on its own to drink, or even a small plain yogurt pot. A piece of fruit would also count as that amount of carbohydrate. And of course, from a nourishment point of view, we would always advise you to try and opt for fruit where possible. Now, fruit does contain natural fruit sugars as well. So in regards to fruit, nothing is off limits in terms of the type of fruit you're able to have with this diabetes, because all fruit will have natural sugars. But the important thing is the portions at which you're having. So what we do advise is to try and have one type of fruit and have a single portion in any one sitting. So if you're having, for instance, a medium-sized fruit like a banana, an orange, a pear, an apple, for example, have one of those in one sitting. If you enjoy something like the smaller fruits like kiwis, apricots, or plums, you could have 2 of those. And if you enjoy the tropical fruits like mangoes, papayas, melons, just be aware they are naturally sweeter. So you might find smaller portions of these tend to work better for you. So if you're having something like a mango, for example, maybe a slice of mango would be the right amount. Or something like your watermelon, a small, probably fistful size would be the suitable amount. And for any berries, if you enjoy berries as a fruit choice, you could do a palm-sized portion of berries would give you enough carbohydrate for the snack. Now with your snacks, again, as we were recommending with the main meals to always pair the foods, with your snacks, if you're having carbohydrate within the snack, do make sure you're adding in some form of a protein with that, just to balance out the sugars. Now, you don't need to take a finger prick test after your snacks, but what we do advise is that you keep any snacks you're having at least an hour away from your main meal. And the reason we suggest this is to make sure that you're not overloading your body with too much carbohydrate in one go. And for any snack ideas or inspiration, please do have a look at our dietary resource for that. And you can also have a look at the diabetes.org.uk website for further inspiration. Now, this slide is for any of you who might be following a gluten-free diet. If you have celiac disease, for example, or perhaps you've got gluten intolerance. Now, there are no specific recommendations that we can provide for those of you following a gluten-free diet. But what we do want to make sure, as with anyone who is pregnant, we want to make sure that you're having enough of individual nutrients to sustain a balanced diet overall. So what I've tried to do is list some of the more common carbohydrate food sources you might be including as part of your gluten-free diet, as well as giving you a few food examples of great sources of iron, both from animal and plant-based products, as well as good sources of calcium. So these nutrients would be important for all of you, even if you're not following a gluten-free diet. Now, in the next few slides, I'm just going to briefly touch upon these. What I've tried to do is to highlight some of the more common carbohydrate food sources in some of the different ethnic cuisines that we tend to see in the clients that we support here at King's. So a standard continental diet we've discussed in detail. So your carbohydrate food sources there would be any flour-based products, anything like your breads, rice, pasta, potatoes, grains, fruit, and dairy items are also included within that. If you are following an African Caribbean cuisine, then what you might find is any wheat-based products, anything made of maize, millet, any yams, plantains, root vegetables in particular would all be sources of carbohydrates. If you are following a Mediterranean style cuisine, then as with the continental diet, your more common carbohydrate food sources there may be your pastas, rice, potatoes, risottos, and any starchy vegetables. If you are following an East Asian diet, then the main suggestion there, of course, you've got your noodles, your rice, your potatoes within those meals, but do be advised that with rice, we do suggest for you to avoid anything like jasmine rice or sticky rice, which might be found in sushi, for example. And the reason being is because these formats can be digested very quickly in your body and might cause you to have a blood glucose spike. And then if you're following a South Asian diet, some of your more common carbohydrate foods might be your chapatis, your rotis, your parathas, any dosas, idlis, varas, any potatoes or root vegetables also. And don't get caught out by any condiments that might have hidden sugars within them as well. Now, this next slide is to really highlight the importance of getting familiar with reading food labels. Food labels can be a really good resource for you to identify the total carbohydrates that might be present in the foods that you're purchasing, as well as the glucose amounts within those as well. Now, sometimes sugar will not necessarily be labeled as simply as that on a food label. So if you identify on a label any words which include an ending of OSE, so any glucose, lactose, maltose, sucrose, or fructose, for example, these are alternate names of sugar. Anything like syrups, honey, molasses, agave nectars, any food items based off of fruit juices, fruit concentrates, anything like your date sugars, date syrups, coconut sugars, they are all essentially alternate names of sugar. So where possible, they are best avoided. If you are someone who has a sweet tooth, or maybe you're adding sugar to any teas, coffees, beverages, or any foods even at the moment, we would advise you to cut out all sources of added sugars. If you do still have a sweet tooth and you still need a bit of sweetness in your meals or your beverages, then you might wish to try an alternate sweetener, artificial sweetener, to compensate as an intermediary step. So where possible, we would advise you to opt for one of the more naturally based artificial sweeteners, which are stevia, because it's based off of a plant. But where possible, also, we would say don't overuse the artificial sweeteners. And that's because the science is not really there to support the use of artificial sweeteners in pregnancy. So if you're having, for example, a glass or two a day of a no added sugar beverage, that's not going to be a problem. But if you're having liters of those types of fluids, you might wish to cut back. Now, talking about hydration, of course, we've focused heavily on the food point of view, but hydration is equally important. We want to make sure that you're having the right type of fluids through the day and making sure you're not harming your health in any way. So if you are someone who is having fizzy drinks like your Cokes, Pepsis, Fantas, for example, or any energy drinks like a Red Bull or a Monster or any high caffeinated products, please do try where possible to cut these out for the duration of your pregnancy. If you are someone who is having fruit juices, smoothies, milkshakes through the day, we also suggest to try and either cut down or cut these out completely for the duration of your pregnancy. And that is because in a liquidized form, even if these products are made from fruits or vegetables, you are losing a lot of the nourishment from these foods and you're losing the fiber that might be present within them. Essentially, what you're drinking is liquid glucose, which is not going to be healthy for you, and it's not going to help in terms of your glucose levels for the diabetes control. Instead, what we would always encourage you to do is to try and have a lot of water through the day, so plain water. If you're someone who is not keen on plain water, you can always naturally flavor your water with lemon slices, cucumber slices, ginger or mint. If you enjoy herbal teas, they're a great option. So something like a ginger tea, chamomile tea, peppermint tea can be quite helpful. Or if you're someone who drinks teas and coffees, the caffeinated versions, through the day, that's absolutely fine. But do be aware that too much caffeine in the pregnancy might impact the development of your baby. So what we advise is to stick to 1 or 2 cups of tea or coffee in the day if it's a caffeinated version. And if you're having any more than that through the day, you might wish to cut back. So those are the main dietary recommendations. So as I said, it's essentially healthy eating principles at the core of what we're advising. But yes, you do need to focus in on the types of carbohydrates you're having as well as the portion sizes of these. Now, the next step is to look at your physical activity through the pregnancy. This is really important for your general well-being. It can help with moods, it can help to keep your blood pressure within a healthy range, and it can also somewhat help with the diabetes too. So particularly if you're noticing your post-meal readings are coming up slightly high above target, so anywhere from 7.1 to 7.5, for example, you might find something as simple as a 20-minute walk immediately after your meals can help to settle these. If you want any advice around which types of exercises are suitable, you can always refer to the NHS website, the diabetes.org.uk website, or the Tommy's website for further inspiration. But essentially, it's any exercise that you enjoy and anything, of course, that is safe to do for the pregnancy. So walking, dancing, swimming, yoga, Pilates have all been quite popular choices. And in terms of recommendations, we advise about half an hour a day. But if you're able to do just that or more than that, that's great. And do make sure you're listening to your body and adapting as you progress through your pregnancy, because you're likely to have some days where you're able to do a bit more exercise and some days where you're just not really feeling as energetic. So that's absolutely fine. Now, the next things I want to talk you through are a bit about the diabetes medications, which we may or may not use to support your management of gestational diabetes through your pregnancy. Now, for some of you, depending upon what your original diagnostic test results were, whether you were diagnosed based on your OGTT test results or your HbA1c level, you would have been given advice as to how we were initially going to support your management. So for some of you, we might have suggested that we would start by looking at dietary and exercise intervention initially to support your management, and we might be able to just stick to this for the duration of your pregnancy. For others, you might be transitioned onto medication at some stage in your pregnancy, or for some of you, you may have been recommended to start the medication from the initial stages, depending on your test results. Now, if you are started on diabetes medication, this is definitely not a reflection on your ability to manage the diabetes. It's not a negative thing at all. It's just another level of support which we are able to provide to you to help to keep you safe and healthy, as well as keeping baby safe and healthy. Now, there are two types of medication which we may use here at King's. So one is in the form of an oral tablet called metformin, and this helps to make your body cells more sensitive to the insulin hormone which you're naturally producing. The other type of medication is insulin injections. And there are two types of insulin injections which we may use to support you. One is known as a rapid-acting insulin, which is given at specific meal times, and the other is known as a background insulin, which can sometimes help to bring high fasting levels back within range. Now, for some, we might be able to manage you with just the metformin alone through your pregnancy, or for others, we might need a combination of the two. For some of you as well, metformin may not be the most appropriate medication choice for you, in which case we might just be putting you straight onto insulin. Now, the decision to start medication will all be governed by what your finger prick test results are indicating, and we will also look at your blood work when you come in to see us for your face-to-face appointments. If we are deciding to put you on medication, we will have that discussion with you and talk through any questions or queries or concerns you might have. So please do not worry. Now, the fact that you're started on medication in the pregnancy does not have a significant effect on your birthing options, but what will affect your birthing plans will be how the diabetes is being managed overall. If at the time of your delivery you are on any diabetes medication, the medical team on the ward will advise you as to when you can stop taking the medication, or if for any reason you need to continue for a short period of time after the birth. And finally, I just wanted to go through some post-delivery care aspects that you need to be aware of. So the fact that you've had gestational diabetes in this pregnancy does become a risk factor for you developing this again in any future pregnancies you may be planning. So next time round, when you're thinking about having another baby, we do always advise you to speak with your GP and just remind them you've had this before, so they can then take appropriate steps to support you in that process. This time round, once you've had your baby, approximately 3 months after the delivery, we will ask your GP to take a blood test from you. And this will be to look at a marker called HbA1c. Now, this is a marker that is used in diabetes that allows us to assess your average glucose control over the previous couple of months. And they'll do this check just to make sure that everything is okay from a diabetes perspective and from your glucose management point of view. And they'll stop doing this test once everything has settled back down after the birth. Now, the really important thing to note for yourself is, as a consequence of you having this diabetes in the pregnancy, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes, which is the lifelong diabetes, does increase after the birth. So to reduce your risk of developing type 2 diabetes, we really encourage you to focus on your diabetes prevention efforts once the baby has settled into a routine and you're ready to focus on your own health goals. So with type 2 diabetes, there are a lot of what we call preventable or modifiable risk factors, which you can work on to minimize your risk of developing this. So, for example, if weight is one of your goals to work on, working towards maintaining a healthy weight range can go a big way to preventing diabetes. Keeping physically active, as well as maintaining a good meal pattern and healthy balanced diet, can also go a long way to support this. If you would like more support with diabetes prevention, there is an NHS diabetes prevention program available, which your GP can discuss with you and refer you into if it's appropriate. If you are someone who prefers more one-to-one support, you can always ask your GP to refer you to your local dietitian outpatient service, where we can provide a more tailored, personalized approach to your diabetes prevention efforts. If you are someone who prefers to do it yourself, then there are a lot of great resources that are available to you. So I would encourage you to have a look at the NHS website, the diabetes.org.uk website too, for further inspiration. And finally, this is just a list of contact points and email addresses for different members of the team, which you might find useful to just keep note of. And that is the end of our education session today. Hopefully, it has answered some of the queries which you might have had at the start of the session. But if you would like further support, then please do get in touch with our team. And you can do that on those contact points which I've just shown you. It was lovely to speak with you today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Best of luck with your pregnancy journey, and I hope everything goes well for you. Goodbye.